So hello again, this is Arthur Sweetman joining you from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm the host of today's webinar, and on behalf of Hire Immigrants in Toronto and the Ontario government, who's the sponsor for this webinar, I'd like to welcome you. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat box in the corner of your screen to let us know. I think your screen looks like mine. The chat box should be on the right-hand side, although yours might be a little bit different than mine. Before we begin, I'd like us to get oriented with the webinar room. If you can take a few minutes. In the corner of your screen, you'll find the chat box, which you can use to share your comments with us. Please feel free to submit your comments at any time, but please save your questions for our presenters for the Q&A at the end of the session. Of course, the more participants we have, the livelier our discussion will be, but I'd like to encourage everyone to participate. Today's webinar will also be recorded, and the video will be uploaded onto our website, hireimmigrants.org. That's H-I-R-E immigrants.org, along with any related resources. Please make sure to share the link with your colleagues and networks. So I hope everyone's had a minute to look around and become familiar with the chat room and what it looks like, and with the web and the screen and the interface. I haven't seen very many comments coming, or I haven't seen very many questions popping up in the chat box where people have problems. But if you do let us know. So I guess we should get going. I want to say good morning or good afternoon to some people, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. Our topic today is a priority issue, not just for our employers or for our government, but also for anyone who has an interest in the successful integration of newcomers and immigrants into our society. My name is Arthur Sweetman, and I'm in the Department of Economics at McMaster University, and I do research on the economics of immigration, as well as issues related to immigrants' use of health services, among other topics. It's my pleasure to host today's webinar on behalf of Hire Immigrants in partnership with Magnet, a not-for-profit social innovation hub that addresses issues related to unemployment and underemployment of Canadians. It's based at Ryerson University in Toronto, and the Hire Immigrants program provides a platform for employers and stakeholders, both for-profit ones and otherwise, to find and share practical solutions to the types of challenges we'll be talking about today. The Government of Ontario is sponsoring today's webinar. It has been a valuable public sector partner that's committed to finding solutions to the integration and employment challenges faced by newcomers and immigrants. Employment and labor market attachment have always been linked to the immigration experience in one way or another through issues related to integration and social mobility. For many newcomers and immigrants, the challenge of learning a new language stands in the way of attaining meaningful employment and, in turn, successful long-term integration into a new society. So the focus of today's discussion will be the effectiveness of the teach first, work later strategy of language acquisition in anticipation of labor market success. In my view, there's very little Canadian research on this topic for adults, and I'm aware of no credible evaluations of alternative approaches to language skills or delivery, or language acquisition, language skill delivery for new adult immigrants. However, we're seeing increasing interest from government, employers, and stakeholders to produce evidence-based findings with respect to language acquisition and its impact on employment outcomes. Many immigrant-receiving nations are facing challenges similar to Canada. I'm going to categorize them in three groups. The first is to address perceptions of impending labor market shortages. The second is the global refugee crisis, which continues to grow. And the third, which is of particular interest to Canada, is the effort to integrate the highest, or one of the highest, permanent immigration rates among developed nations, and to integrate a large stream of people into our labor markets. It's imperative that we start to provide practicable and replicable solutions regarding language acquisition for adult immigrants. Talking to subject matter experts and innovative employers is a good start when it comes to strategizing and planning for better integration outcomes, to reduce employment barriers, and to encourage people to see immigration as a potential source of prosperity. Joining us today are two experts on this topic. One is an economist, the other an employer, and they'll both be sharing with us their dynamic and varied expertise on the topic of what comes first, language or work. Or perhaps we should phrase that as what should come first, language or work, since I think it's an open question. The first presenter is Jonas Manson. He's an associate professor of economics at Linnaeus University in Sweden. His research focus is on policy evaluation, specifically labor market policy, integration, and education policy. Our second presenter is Marissa Preston, the training liaison at LIUNA, Local 506 in Toronto, here in Canada. It has over 15 years of experience assisting persons with barriers in entering into employment in the construction sector through apprenticeship programs. Before we turn to them, a quick word about who else is in this virtual room. There are over 300 participants registered, and we're a diverse group. A great number of us are employers, civil servants, service providers, and professionals in the field of immigration and employment. So we've got a mixed audience today. Some are Canadians and others are joining us from abroad. Welcome to our Canadian participants, some returning and some new, and welcome to our international colleagues. The webinar will go for 1 hour, ending at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And so as not to seem rude later on, I'm going to warn you now that I may need to interject at times to move us along. I think it's important that the items at the start of the webinar not crowd out those nearer to the end. With that, I'll turn to our presenters. If it's okay, let's begin with Jonas. Can you tell us something about your research and your study, the integration of immigrants, the role of language proficiency and experience?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, Toronto from South Africa. So this is a quite old study that we did in the early 2000s, but we have continued to work on the issue of integration of immigrants. And recently we conducted a policy evaluation of a mentoring program in Sweden that also is one step on the same agenda, so to speak. How can we find policies that work towards immigrants? So I will present the study that we conducted on the project evaluation on language proficiency and also a little bit of mentorship within that one. I don't know how I changed pictures, but could you change the picture for me? Thank you. So we go into the project. It was an initiative launched by the trade union, and it contained two parts. Well, language training was one part, and it seemed not as an instrument. It's seen as an instrument to actually be able to get a job. So what we're trying to look here is a combination. So if you please take the next slide. So if we look at what's in the project, it was a combination of community, content-based, and task-based. So we have combinations of actual school teaching of Swedish language, but that is combined with mentorship. So you can actually talk to someone, talk to a Swede, and get relevant vocabulary, like on-the-job training, more or less. So the mentorship was a job placement also. Next slide, please. So if we look at the participants, they took part in 50% of the group had language training, and 50% were enrolled in practical work practice training. And they were combining this, so there are 3 weeks in schooling and 3 weeks of practical workplace training, and then we went on so for 18 weeks. And when we look at when we said, okay, the outcome of this, either you get employed or you actually were enrolled in a labor market program, and we'll come back to that later on, or you were enrolled in education with outside of the labor markets. So that means that you take up upper secondary school, you have university training, or whatever it is. Or, as a final outcome, you could remain unemployed. And as I said, the program lasted for 18 weeks. Next slide, please. So if we look at the evaluation design here, so we had an intervention group consisted of project participants, and we had a comparison group. There were other immigrants registered at the employment office, and the data is quite good in Sweden because you don't get any money if you don't register at the public employment. So that means that there's quite high incentives to be registered. Next slide, please. So we would like to have a random assignment here, of course, but here we have some selection. So we asked, or actually the project asked the employment service to pick out immigrants that they would consider to have language problems as one of the main indicators of problem with the labor market. So that means that we had a group that were negatively selected into treatment. That means that we can't use just comparing outcomes. So we need some type of matching. And going back to 2003, when it was one of the first studies where we used propensity score matching to select the comparison group. So it's a quasi-experimental design, and we rely on that we can actually mimic the selection process that takes place on the employment office. Just a quick look at the data on the next slide. I will not comment on that very much, but we have decent amount of data on individual level, and we also conducted interviews. And when we found matches, for a couple of them, we interviewed employment officers as well, so that we could be, I'm not sure, but at least it was decent matching that we had. And we also had, we had information about the status before they entered the program, so we have unemployment history and stuff like that. That is important to control for. Okay, so that's on data. So what happened at the end of this 18 weeks, or the outcome? Well, we're looking at basically two different outcomes. We're looking at the probability to leave unemployment, and within that we have three categories. Either you leave for a full-time job. Job in Sweden is defined as a full-time unsubsidized job on the open labor market. I'll comment on that later on. But we also included that you were judged that you could actually, when you acquire Swedish, then you can enroll in regular education, that is, education outside the employment office. And the final output is more or less that you moved closer to the labor market. That is job, regular education, or that you could take part in a labor market program, a normal, ordinary labor market program. We look at the probabilities, and we look also at the speed, the duration of unemployment. So we have two different types of outcome: probability to leave unemployment, and also on the duration. So if we look at the first result, the probability to get a job. Here you have it. Yeah. Okay. So it's actually wrong here in the slide. It is the probability to either get a job or enter regular education in the end of the observation period. And the observation period, let me say something about that. The participants were enrolled between the 1st of November 2001 and 1st of November 2002, and we followed them 1 year later, up to 1 year later. So in September, actually, 2003, we took a dive down to the data and see where they were, where the status was. And when we look at this slide here, you see that the coefficient or the marginal effect is negative, but it's insignificant. So that means that the probability to leave for job or regular education is not significant. We don't find any such effect. And also the negative sign is a little bit alarming. It could actually mean that you are locked here. And lock-in effects is sometimes seen as something negative, but for this group, the group that didn't have the possibility to participate in regular labor market training, this could actually be a good thing in the long run. Next slide, please. So here's what I'm saying. So no effects, but the negative sign actually be something good in the long run. I'm commenting that also in the end of this presentation. So let's turn over to the speed here. So what we did was to estimate the probability to remain in unemployment. So the next slide, please. The curves or the plots here represent the intervention group and the comparison group. And if we follow the line here, you can see that up to 100 days approximately, there's no difference between the intervention group and the control group. But after 100 days, something happened. And here we are looking at the time it takes to either get a job, go to regular education, or be in a labor market program. After 100 days, the curve representing the intervention group is lower than the intervention group. That means that it's a lower probability to remain in unemployment, that is, to be open unemployed. So if you look at the media, you can say that for the participants to remain unemployed is 150 days, and from control it's 250 days. So we see some impact here that actually something has happened for the intervention group. Okay, so we take the next slide. Here we had the outcome, getting a job. But here I would like to stress the fact that we, in Sweden, when we define job, as I said before, job is full-time, unsubsidized job, the open labor market. And here the picture isn't that good. Between 0 and 370 days, we actually have, well, it's no difference, more or less. They are similar. But then something starts to happen. But we have very, very few observations after that. So I can't say that it's significant in any way. So the program here, combining language training and also mentorship, if we look at the main findings of it, so the next slide, please. So we didn't find any significant impact on the probability to get a job, but we found an impact on the time it takes to leave unemployment, or at least move a step further towards the core labor market. So there are some strong indications of that. So what can we tell more about this study if we make some reflection about it? So next slide, please. So when we come to, we use 3 different outcomes: getting a job, or job or education, or actually be able to enter some labor market program. So when we are looking at this group of individuals, hard to place immigrants with language difficulties, I would say that it could be that getting a job, on a full-time job on the labor market, open labor market, could be unrealistic. So getting the outcome, the expectations, realistic is really, really important when you work and evaluate efforts towards this group. I did some recent research on what will happen with the impacts that's published in Evidence and Policy on what happened with the impacts when we switch definitions. And I could see that here we have a potential, really potential problem when politicians or program, those applying for money, set up unrealistic goals. And when some external evaluate towards those goals, and we don't find any impacts, it could be just that the expectations was unrealistic. So let me reflect a little bit more about that on the next slide. So if I've learned something from 2003 until 2015, researching on immigrant integration, it is really important that you set realistic goals and expected outcomes, and that it's possible to measure. Sometimes, at least in Sweden, I don't know how it is in Canada or around the world, but we sometimes use the term that we move closer to the core labor market. But then we have to actually try to define what that means. For this group, it takes time. And I don't see that the question for this seminar is what comes first, language or work. I think it's a combo. I think that the type of language training that takes place in the workplace, that you actually can show your skills and also learn something, increase your potential on the labor market. So what comes first? I think it's a combination here. And I also think that artists said something about evidence-based here. I think that for groups that are far away from the core labor market, we have to plan and actually look for this longer time horizons and look how the impact develops to learn something, to get evidence-based. And then we can start about the timing and stuff like that. So the contribution from Sweden is that we could find some evidence of increased speed, but not on the probability. But we think also there are some timing issues here. And we did a follow-up, but I didn't have the results here. But I think after 2 years, we're almost in the same situation as after 1 year follow-up. So I think I used my 15 minutes.
Very well. Thank you very much, Jonas. I appreciate your summary. Can you give us some sense from your perspective, how transferable is this Swedish experience to the North American, especially the Canadian context?
I think that, of course, it's a totally different labor market. And our coverage rate with collective agreement and stuff is almost 100%. I don't know how it is in Canada. Our labor market is quite sticky. But at the same time, I think that for this group, what I said in the end, that we need to set realistic goals. So transfer it to the experience in Canada, I think more or less you can do it, but maybe you have to change the timing issue a little bit. It may go a little bit faster in Canada. I don't know, but I think you can transfer.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Maybe I can take you in a slightly different direction for a minute. I don't know how familiar you are with what's been happening in Finland, but it's close to you, and I know about it, so you might know about it as well. There's been some work by Matti Sarvamäki, I may be mispronouncing his name, looking at some restructuring of active labor market programs in Finland. Are you aware of his work?
I'm not aware of the work, but I'm aware of the policy, yes.
Okay, but they changed the rule in Finland. They gave caseworkers a lot more flexibility. This was about a decade ago, to make individualized plans for immigrants. And the caseworkers, one of the things that they did was to increase dramatically the amount of language training relative to other types of training. And then they followed these individuals, the immigrants who were being trained, over 10 years in the Finnish data, and they found a cumulative 47% increase in earnings associated with the change from, I'll call it generic training, to an increased focus on language training. Do you think, what do you think of this study and this type of analysis, which basically argues that a shift towards increased language training first is of great advantage? Of course, we have to be careful because the old Finnish system was not at all like the Canadian system. They had much more general training and much more or much less language training than the Canadian does now. In fact, the new the new Finnish system looks a lot like the Canadian system at present.
Yeah. As I said, I just evaluated another mentoring program, and my experience on that mentoring program is that it's the combination that you have. I mean, if you're talking about school language training, taking a course in Swedish or a course in English, and then in the next step go out, if you can combine it, so you have some work experience, especially for people that come with skills. If you can show your skills and also get some language training, as soon as you have passed some barrier there, I think, at least from my experience, look at the mentorship, the mentor program, and look at the content of that mentor program. Well, what it said was, okay, I was able to speak Swedish with a Swedish guy, and picking up the words that I need in my workplace. But of course, language, if you don't handle language, it's a problem, especially for those jobs, that the easy jobs, if you service jobs and stuff like that, then you need to have some language, of course. So you have to have some basic, but I think that you will move even more rapidly, if you make a combo of language and on-the-job training and take care of the skills that the immigrants have.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Jonas. I think it's now time to turn to Marissa. She is, as I said, from LIUNA, Local 506, one of North America's largest construction trade unions. Marissa, can you tell us a bit about LIUNA's practice of hiring individuals with minimum English language proficiency and how you integrate them into your workplaces? I'm not sure if anyone else can't hear Marissa right now. I can't. Maybe that we're having a small technical problem.
Hello?
Is that you, Marissa?
That's me. Sorry. I had my phone on mute.
Okay, sorry. You should start again. Thank you.
Okay. So thanks, everyone. Yes, LIUNA Local 506, we represent over 8,000 construction workers in the Greater Toronto area. We represent over 15 sectors, and we have a very diverse membership. When we bring people into the union, they do have to go through health and safety training now. I'm sure everyone is aware that due to the new restrictions, especially in Ontario, there are 3 mandatory health and safety courses that have to be taken. So Working at Heights, WMIS, and the Ministry of Labor's 4 steps. We at the training center do membership training, so all the health and safety training for our members comes through this center. Equipment training, which includes the smaller equipment and also larger excavators up to 40 tons. We have 4 different apprenticeship programs, and we also provide training to community. So we're involved in 4 different pre-apprenticeship programs, and we also provide health and safety and some skills training to other programs out there. We can go to the next slide. So I've just listed some of our health and safety programs. I just want everyone to understand that they're all government regulated programs, which means that the language and the jargon, while our instructors are teaching, is obviously not everyday English that you hear on the street. The equipment training also, I'll tell you, I'll sit in an equipment class or I'll go out while the students are learning, the participants are learning, our members, and sometimes I actually don't even know what they're saying because it is very specific construction language, sorry. And we can go to the next slide. So here are all the sectors that we support within the City of Toronto. And it's important to understand that these sectors also have different safety trainings that come with them. So for concrete sawing and drilling, they're going to have to learn about all the different equipment and how each piece of equipment is used. Waterproofing has very toxic materials they use, same with cement finishers, abatement. It's all about removal of lead, mold, and asbestos. So once again, it's all specific to that sector. And we can move on. So because we've had to respond to the needs of our 8,000 members, we have hired business reps that reflect the membership of the different sectors. So I have listed the 6 different languages that our business reps speak. Portuguese and Italian, obviously. We know that the Portuguese and the Italian are very, very proud of working construction. They talk about building the city. We have a large membership. A percentage of our membership is Portuguese and Italian. We have also found a huge amount of people coming in that speak Spanish. So we hired a business rep from, he's from South America, and he represents our demolition and abatement sector because if you go on one of those job sites, you are most likely going to be speaking Spanish or Portuguese, actually, and he can kind of flip-flop between those two. We also hired 2 people that speak Pular. They're from Africa, and we have a huge amount of people from that area. And so we found that the need, not just a business rep, but actually our dispatchers also speaks that in French. It's not as needed, but we do find the African colonies, African countries that have been colonized from France and they've moved up here, they speak French. So we found that that has been also very successful. So we can move on. So the current practices, what we're doing right now is we do get a lot of requests from contractors that, you know, a lot of our members have low education, and I would say it's the older generation. So our members that are 50 plus that came to this country and, you know, they moved here with their family, they moved into, say, a Portuguese or an Italian neighborhood, and they didn't need to learn the language. Then they went and worked in construction, and in the 60s and 70s, it was mostly Italian and Portuguese-speaking people. So we have found that with the new health and safety regulations, they're unable to get through the courses in English. So we, when it's requested, and depending on how many people are in the class, but we will provide an instructor, and we've done this in Portuguese mostly, it's mainly in Portuguese, for a group of workers. So we've done it for as little as 5 people up to about 15 people. And it usually comes in through an employer's request. And then they'll come, and it's usually working at heights because it's now a 6-hour course. There's a written test and a hands-on test, and it's not easy. People do fail. So we want to make it the best experience for our members, and especially members that aren't confident in their language. So we have chosen to provide services in other languages. So as you see, we have only actually done Portuguese and Italian. We find that other languages have, because you can't speak your own language on the job site as much, if you are speaking Polish or if you are speaking French, whereas if you are Portuguese or Italian, you can get away with speaking your language all day long. So other people from other countries that speak other languages have had to learn English, whereas the Portuguese and Italian haven't. So we do provide services in those languages. So another issue we do find is that when people come in to write tests, or they have to go to the ministry to write a test, so for apprenticeship or for their abatement worker, we have to write a test down at the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities, and I know they have a new name, but they can take a translator. We also do provide one-on-one training. So if someone comes up here and has to get their WMIS done, they've been kicked off a job, and they have to get their WMIS done, and we have an instructor in our center that's speaking the language, we'll put them in and do one-on-one training. And also, what we do is if a member calls up and says, listen, I can only speak Russian, I don't speak English very well, we try to put them in a class with another member that speaks that language, and we sit them together, and we let the instructor know, listen, these two guys are going to sit together because one can't speak the language, and we're going to have him translate. He's agreed, and we move forward that way. So the outcome here is that when members call, because members pay, I think it's about 67 cents an hour into the training fund. So whatever training they need, they come to the training center because they pay hourly for it. So instead of going and paying, $2,000 or $3,000 to get some equipment training or their propane renewed, they don't do that. They come here. And because every member pays into the training, we have to provide training for all our members, whether they have low literacy or they have low English languages. We try to provide it. So this allows us to provide services to all our members. This also allows us to accommodate the contractor's requests. So, contractors and members, they leave everything to the last minute. So, they find out in 2 days that someone's forklift license is expired. So, and they're unable to run that piece of equipment on that site the next day. They'll call us and say, I need emergency training. So this allows us, especially if the member can't get through the paperwork and can't get through the classroom, this allows us because we do have all types of languages within our office with the business reps and our trainers. And also it's so important, this is a big one for our instructors, is that someone has low English skills, that they're not being, it's not being communicated, not even just here, but it's not even on the job site being communicated properly how important safety is. And that's one thing, young workers and newcomers to Canada are always put in positions because, sometimes they're desperate for work, so they're put into positions that they're doing some unsafe practices. This allows us to communicate with them. Okay, next one. So we are also answering a call from the Syrian, and it's not just going to be, but we're going to be focusing on Syrian refugees. This is a partnership between Access Employment, the Ontario Masonry Training Center, and Local 506 Training Center. So what we will be doing is working together. Access is going to provide all the pre, post, and supports to the participants during the program. We're also going to have language training for them, which is going to focus on construction terminology because, as I said, it is its own language. So we're going to, between the Ontario Masonry Training Center and 506, we're going to do a 4-week modular skills training. And this won't just give them skills to come work in construction, but we're going to give them skills and equipment training that will allow them to go work in a warehouse or the industrial sector. So maybe they get here and they think, I don't want to work construction. I don't want to work out in the cold and the heat. I wouldn't mind working at Home Depot, or I wouldn't mind working in, the industrial building down the street from me that's hiring. So we'll give them their scissor lift and some other equipment, the smaller forklift, so that they're able to walk in and say, yes, I have a forklift license. Yes, I have an elevated work platform license. And they'll have a basic knowledge, hopefully, of the English language, because we will have to be able to teach them. So we're going to make sure they have that knowledge. They'll have some tickets. They'll have all their safety training. And hopefully we can get some of these Syrian refugees out to work. And I think that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Marissa. That was excellent. A couple of questions for you before we go on, though. How transferable do you think LIUNA's model is to multilingual work environments?
With what we're doing,
how would it function in a multilingual work environment as opposed to one where, for example, an Italian worker is working in a work site where most other workers, or at least a substantial number of them, speak Italian?
Well, what we're doing isn't actually, it's not different from a lot of the other trade unions. Our sister local has over 50,000 members. They're a small town, and they have these issues all the time. So yes, the multilingual, so this is the problem. They go on construction sites. Some people are speaking English, some people are speaking Portuguese, some people are speaking Italian. So when they come here, they know Italian words, they know Portuguese words, they know English words. That's honestly what we're dealing with. And if you ask probably the carpenters or like our other labor, our sister local, they have the same thing. They'll come here and they'll use words in Italian that our instructors know, I don't know, but they understand. So what we try to do is deliver everything in English, but for those that can't speak, we deliver in the language of choice. So it can be transferred, absolutely.
Okay, well, that's very good to know. Thank you. I think it's time for us to turn to audience questions. If you have any, could you please type them into the chat box in the bottom right, and we'll see if our respondents can provide responses. So I think we already have one from the Immigrant Center in Manitoba.
And there's someone, Christine, she's asked, is there any online training? We do have WMIS you can do online, but it's only in English. So if someone can't speak the language, that's when we bring them up. We do a lot of one-on-one WMIS training. And then...
Sorry, I think I made a mistake. I told everyone to ask questions into the chat. I meant to say, yeah. Can you ask questions into the Q&A box on your screen? Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay.
I know not everyone can see the Q&A box in the same way as the chat box.
Okay, and this one says, Arthur, do your members have a minimum CLB? No. We really actually don't do any language training. If a member wants to work in construction and has the skills and the want to work, we bring them in. There's not a minimum. We'll deal with the language after. Okay. I'm trying to make this technology work. I'm having a trouble here. So I apologize to everyone. But Zaid Ahmed has a question. And the big question for both of you, I guess. So what's the conclusion? What comes first, language or other types of training?
Marissa, please go ahead.
I don't know what the conclusion is. I think it honestly depends. I personally would like them to have a basic knowledge because I don't want to send someone out into the workforce. In our sector in construction, it's dangerous. There's cranes, there's equipment, there's holes, there's hazardous material. So if someone can't speak the language, we don't want to throw them out. But if they have a basic knowledge of it, they can get out there, as long as they can understand basically what you're saying. But if they have zero language, I would not put anyone on the job site.
Do you think, Jonas, do you have a response to the what comes first, which or training?
Well, I think that Marissa put it quite well. I think that you need to be, of course, you need basic knowledge, but I also think that to speed up the process, I think that you need to have a combo. I don't think that putting anyone on a school bench for 6 months to learn Swedish or English first and then go out to get a job will improve the probabilities rather, or compared to if you have a combo. of a little bit of experience and, of course, first some language training. You have to eat, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we have a question from Christina. She wants to know, what's the average retention rate of clients when they're placed in a construction position? And it sounds like this is for Marissa.
Well, I would say out of the 15 people that go through our apprenticeship every year, no, not every year, every 3 to 4 months, I would say maybe 2 or 3 don't make it at their first job. Most of them continue. But because we're a union, they're a union member, they go back on the out-of-work list. So maybe they get dispatched into the demolition sector and they're not good. And then the next time they get onto a general labor site and they work for a general and they're doing cleanup and helping the carpenters and whatnot, and they'll succeed that way. So because we have so many different sectors, they're able to try different things. So most of our people they end up being successful.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So someone, in fact, a couple of people want to know, where is the LIUNA Training Center located? And people want to know, are they in York Region? Are there any others spread across the province or the country that you know of?
Yes. We have lots of training centers. We have one. We actually have one. I see Bruno from Windsor. We have a training center in Windsor and Sarnia. Now, we all, of course, have different ways of applying, but it's usually through apprenticeship. So Construction Craft Worker is our signatory program. It's 8 weeks in class, and then you go to work, and then after 2,400 hours, you come back and do your second level, and that's when they get all their equipment training, and then they go write a test, and they're a journey person. They get the Red Seal trade for Construction Craft Worker. So I would, if you go on TriFunds, it's LIUNA TriFunds, which is training funds. There's actually a list of all our different locals throughout Ontario, and we're throughout Canada actually.
And we can provide a link to that website on the hireimmigrants.org website at the end of the webinar.
Yes. Okay.
So one good question someone just had, they're all good questions, but one that just popped up that tweaked my interest is, what types of recognition are companies giving to their employees taking this type of program? Again, I think that's mostly for Marissa.
Taking what type of program?
Your programs, how well are they recognized by employers?
Oh, well, see, our employers are signatory to us, so they understand that. So we actually don't usually bring anybody in unless they can prove their skills, but most people come in through apprenticeship. So our employers will call and ask for a construction craft worker apprentice or a cement finisher apprentice, a precast apprentice. They know how we train. We have local apprenticeship committees where we meet once every 3 months. The contractors come here. We go through training. Sometimes we have the apprentices working. They'll go see what they're doing. They sometimes provide materials, instructors. So they're very involved.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question here, I think targeting you more than Jonas. When you assess a client's language skills, do you pay more attention to writing skills, or is speaking the primary skill that you focus on?
Oh, speaking.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And Jonas, we have a question for you. Can you point us towards any other reports or studies regarding the long-term impact of an early focus on language training for new immigrants?
Not in my head. I can't do that. And that's actually a question to you, because I know there's quite a lot of things going on in Canada, and from my point of view, there's a surprising little strong empirical evidence of what is working. I've been into mentorship now, for example, for the last 1.5 years, and I know that there's a lot of things going on in Canada, but I don't find any real evidence.
Yeah, so this
is in the wrong place.
My view of this is, for the Canadian situation, that there are a large number of things happening, but very little analysis to figure out what works well and what doesn't work well, and perhaps more importantly, what works well for whom. Because I don't think any of us believe that there's one program that's going to do well for every type of person. We need some variety of programs, and then we need some some way to think about what's the best program for different types of people with different backgrounds, different interests, different skill sets. And my view is that we have only scratched the surface on this in Canada. We really have very little understanding, with the exception of children. There's actually been a lot of research and a lot of analysis and a lot of attempts over the last 20 or 30 years about teaching a second language to people in elementary and high schools. And I think the Canadian education system does a remarkably good job on that front. Where we have very little knowledge is around adult education and adult training for language skills and for new immigrants arriving.
Yeah, so that's a reflection of mine as well. Going through the literature on mentorship, I found very, very few reports or studies that actually provided some evidence on what works or if it works anyway. Here is a challenge for us also to actually look into the programs and try to do some proper impact studies.
Right. So for Marissa, there's a number of questions popping up about other languages, especially Arabic. Do you know of any other programs that are coming online that deal with Arabic speakers?
No, I don't. But we also participate in another pre-apprenticeship called I'm Eglinton, and they do have an Arabic-speaking participant right now who is quite bright and has taken it upon himself to do some translation of the training manuals. And I'm hoping that he'll have some of it translated for when the Syrian refugee program starts. The thing is that they still are going to learn it in English because we want them going out having a command of the English language. But just to be able to go home at night or to look over the training manual and see it in their own language would really benefit them.
Right, that's excellent. So a related question that a couple of people have asked questions similar to this is, what advice do you have when approaching employers who fear about health and safety issues, especially safety issues, for people who have little or minimal language skills in English or French?
You know what? I haven't really had that experience. The thing is, like right now, we're doing our first program with the Syrian trades, that program. That's going to be our first one. So I think I'm going to get a lot of, I'll get a lot of feedback on that. Because right now, if someone's on a job site, they're usually speaking like Portuguese or Italian. But they don't care if they can't speak English if they're Portuguese or Italian because they can get by. Now, I'll give you an example. We did have a guy here. Well, we do now. We have a member. One of the hardest working guys. Sent him out. He's incredible, and he speaks Mandarin. And the employer called me and said, Marissa, his language level is very, very low. Is there any assistance you guys can give him? Well, we don't have that, but I gave the employer all the information for ESL evening classes. So I don't know if he went. I'm assuming he went because I never talked to the employer again. So, if someone's a hard worker, they're going to take them because right now there's such a shortage of good workers that they're willing to take and train.
That's good to hear, Marissa. We have a question for Jonas from Christine. How were the mentors selected in the program you were studying? Were they volunteers? Did they have any background that was relevant? Or were they matched on the basis of the immigrants' career goals? So what's the selection process for the mentors, and how were they matched with individual immigrants?
Okay, so this was this was voluntary. And so it was the civil sector, so the non-profit organizations that organized it, and they were matched with the wishes or the skills that the immigrant had, the new immigrants. So they tried to match that on skill level, on sector level, but they were voluntary.
Right. We have a somewhat related question from Marissa. When immigrants volunteer to do translation work and their materials are used by the program, do they receive any recognition? Could it help them in their career or on their own work sites if they're identified as a translator?
Yes, it would. That would help. And we do have people that do that now. If someone has low English, there's usually someone on the job site that speaks their language. When I really have to stress, LIUNA has such a diverse population. It's not going to keep someone working. I'll tell you what will keep someone working in construction is showing up every single day on time and working hard and not complaining. That's what's going to keep someone working, not whether they can speak another language or they're translating. That's not going to keep them working. It's their work ethic.
Well, thank you. Another question for you, Marissa. Do you see a role for service providers, that is immigrant service providers, working with newcomers to work in association with your program or programs like yours to support and increase employment for newcomers and support employers in retaining newcomers?
Yeah, we're actually really connected to our Employment Ontario service provider. So I actually come from the Employment Ontario world. I used to work there as a job coach, a job developer, and then I did manage one of the sites. So I've connected a lot of my employers, too, with some of the subsidies that are involved with EO. And working with Access is actually going to be excellent because Access is going to provide all these wraparound supports that a lot of, I believe, the Syrian community is going to need. So we already are very entrenched. We're involved in four pre-apprenticeship programs that are EO driven, and we're always willing to take good people.
So we only have a few minutes left, and Jonas in particular needs to leave us in a couple of minutes. Are there any remaining questions directed specifically for him? Okay. If there are, type them in. I don't see any popping up yet. There's one general question for both Jonas and Marissa from Chris. Is there any general or specific pushback from citizens, in quotes, about refugees getting preferential treatment and, again in quotes, taking our jobs? So are you seeing any pushback about this extra training or any shortcuts being taken with respect to new immigrants?
Well, people say that, but my answer is if the people in Canada that were offered these jobs went to work, we wouldn't have to bring other people in to take the job.
Yeah, and my answer on that,
but I wouldn't say it's huge.
In Sweden, we don't have any such discussion that they're taking the jobs. No way.
Okay, so I think we're coming to the close. We only have about 3 minutes left. Maybe we'll do one last question, and then I'll wrap up. So one last question from Alia is for Marissa again. Are the courses, both by LIUNA and other similar organizations throughout the province, are the courses ongoing throughout the year, or they are primarily offered at certain times a year?
No, they are throughout the year. So a construction craft worker, we have it, it's a 8-week program. So we usually do it February, April, June, September.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And so I think we're at the end of the Q&A session. I'd like to close by asking our presenters one final question, very, very quickly. What advice would you give for those listening today who are looking for solutions to solving labor market shortages by employing newcomers and immigrants with limited language skills? So what's the main piece of advice that you'd give?
Should I start, Marissa?
Yeah, you could start.
Okay, coming from a scientific point of view and looking at the different type of program, it's not an advice on how to construct program. It's more an advice of it takes time to integrate, and we have to be aware of that we are moving people closer and closer to the core labor market, and we're laying a puzzle here, the puzzle pieces, and it takes time, and we have to set realistic goals for what we are doing. That's my main final comments.
Okay, and Marissa?
Well, I'm big on sensitivity and being sensitive to people that come from different parts of the world, and accepting them and looking at them for their skills and what they can offer on that site, and not whether they can speak the language, whether they fit in the lunchroom, but really looking at the person for what they're doing on the job site.
Okay, well, thank you both. And so I think we've run out of time. So I'd like, on behalf of all our participants, the Hire Immigrants team at Magnet, and the Ontario government, our sponsor, I'd like to thank Jonas and Marissa one more time for an informative exchange of ideas, as well as for the practical tips and solutions they presented to us. So thank you both very much. Once the webinar recording and downloadable resources are available, you'll be notified via email. The resources are made available at www.hireimmigrants, that's H-I-R-E, immigrants.org. Please bookmark the page and share it with your colleagues and networks. To our audience in Canada and beyond, please stay connected and we'll be tuned in. I'd like to tune you in, that is, but one date in particular in the future, Tuesday, October 25th, which is the next Hire Immigrants webinar. It's entitled Thinking Globally, Acting Locally, Cross-Cultural Team Building and Diversity in the Workplace. Finally, before I let you go, our team values your feedback, and we'd like to hear your thoughts on today's session. So please complete the online evaluation by clicking the link on your screen in the email. And that's it for our webinar today. Goodbye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all. Bye-bye.